college students. And having been a former athlete, I was invited to start helping with some of the women's athletic teams. And I said yes to some volunteer coaching. And after a year or two, I had become a head coach and also an administrator in the athletics department. And as an administrator, working on the athletic programs, I had the opportunity to make a difference for women in the department, to work on making sport more equitable. And what I realized as a person of about age 24 or 25 was that there was a law in my country called Title IX that said that women should have equitable opportunities, but that I didn't understand the law or know how to enforce it. So I was missing an opportunity to empower girls and women through sport. And I believe passionately, from my own experiences, having a transformative experience in sport, that it was important that girls and women had those opportunities. So when I didn't have the knowledge I needed, I decided I better get it. So I went to the University of Iowa and studied with the woman on your far left, Dr. Christine Grant. She was the leading expert on gender equity and the law Title IX that provides equitable opportunities for women in sport. So those are some of my mentors from which I learned to be able to do this work. They were all three administrators in athletics for women at colleges and universities. And they were all three very important in making sure that Title IX has remained strong and allowed opportunities for women. One interesting fact is that where I work in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the Midwest of the United States, all three of them have rooms named after them in my building to honor them. So the organization for which I work has honored those who have made such a difference for women in sport. So let's talk just a little bit about the organization. Well, first I'll say what I'm going to talk about today with you. I want to talk about the NCAA where I work and what I do. I also want to tell you more about this law, Title IX, and the impact it has made on girls and women in our country. And then I want to turn to the why. Why is this important that girls and women should get an opportunity to play sport just as boys and men do? And then I'll point out that in the United States, we still have much work to do to make progress for gender equity. And I want to save plenty of time for you to ask questions and for us to have a dialogue. One of the great things about my trip so far is that I am learning much about your sports system and how it works at your colleges and universities. So I would like to learn from you as well. So the NCAA where I work, how many of you have heard of the NCAA? Some of you have. If you have heard of it, perhaps it's because of our basketball tournament, our March Madness that we do every year. That is our key event. It's televised all across the world, and that's our collegiate men's basketball tournament. We also have one for women at the same time that draws good viewership, but not as much as the men. So the NCAA, my organization, is a nonprofit. And what it does is it works for 1,100 colleges and universities who all have athletics at their institutions. So in our school system in the United States, from about junior high, which is ages 11, 12, 13, all the way through college and university, we have sport embedded in our school system in a way that is somewhat unique from other countries around the world. We treat athletics as a key part of the educational experience. It's not just an add-on or an addition. We see young people's personal development and growth happening through athletics just as we do in the classroom. So we make that a very key part of our educational system. So at the NCAA, our main job is to run the championship events for all of the sports at colleges and universities. So every year, we sponsor 90 championships across the country. That's our main job. We also enforce rules to make sure there is a level playing field. We have a big rule book. And so those are our main jobs. What many people, even in my country, don't know is that we also are working on issues of inclusion. So we have a department in the NCAA called the Office of Inclusion where I work. And at first, we talked a lot about diversity. And when we talk about diversity, we were thinking about representation of all persons getting a chance to play sport. What we've done is move to another level to talk about inclusion. You may be offering many persons the opportunity, but are they in an inclusive environment where they feel welcome, where their dignity is respected, and where they can reach their true potential and be their best? So we work on inclusion, and my office provides education and resources to the 1,100 schools on these 5 issues that you see on the screen. We have 5 areas: disability access to sport, international students and staff. So if any of you were to come to the United States on a scholarship for athletics, we're concerned about your experience and your transition to coming to one of our campuses. So we're focusing on that. We also look at LGBTQ issues and making sure we're providing access for LGBTQ student athletes and also inclusive environments. Very concerned about race and ethnicity and making sure that persons of color are well represented and welcome at our institutions. And then the category of women. In my role at the NCAA, I have the lead on 2 areas, LGBTQ and women. And I'm here to talk to you today particularly about women and gender equity. But if you have questions about any of the other areas of inclusion that we work on, I would be glad to talk with you about that at the end of the presentation. Okay, does that sound good? All right. So if you have questions, write them down, and I'm glad to answer those questions. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how we got the law Title IX. If you've studied American history, you may be aware that in the 1960s, we had a civil rights movement. And that movement started to look at rights for African Americans in our country, for persons of color, and also started to talk about women's rights as well. So in the 1960s and 1970s, we had many laws passed that are connected to social justice issues. And so as those laws were developing, we started to look at access to education for girls and women. And in this picture, you see the man running with some of the women on the track. He was a senator who worked in our United States Congress named Birch Bayh. And what he did was introduce Title IX into Congress to be debated and talked about. And he introduced it as an amendment to civil rights legislation, saying that girls and women are underrepresented in our education and we must open doors for them. There was one particular person who got started this conversation. And she was a professor at one of our state universities. And basically what happened to her is she kept applying for a full-time job as a professor on the faculty, and they kept saying, no, we will not interview you. And she asked why. And she was told, you come on too strong for a woman. And if we could all go in a time machine to go back to pre-1970s when Title IX was passed and walk around campuses at colleges and universities in the United States, you would see that many of the professors, teachers that you would run into were men. There was not much access for women to be university and college professors. One of the reasons that there was an issue with access is that prior to Title IX being passed in 1972, schools and universities would set quotas for how many girls and women they would allow into schools. So you can see in the early 1970s, in our law school and medical school, predominantly those studying there were men. The school might say, we will admit 500 new law students, and we will hold 25 spots for women. So it didn't matter if there were 200 women who were really qualified, there might only be 25 spots. So you're here studying because you want access to opportunity for your career. You need to be in these seats to get to that point. And if you're denied access, obviously that's an issue. So what happened was, in our Congress,